Soviet Empire expresses a political term used in Sovietology to describe the actions and nature of the Soviet Union, as a state, similar to those of a colonial empire. In the wider sense, the term refers to the country's geopolitical imperialist foreign policy during the Cold War. The nations which were part of the Soviet Empire were officially independent countries with separate governments that set their own policies, but those policies had to remain within certain limits decided by the Soviet Union and enforced by threat of intervention by the Soviet forces, and then the Warsaw Pact, which in fact happened in East Germany in 1953, Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 1968, Poland in 1980 and in the Soviet-Afghan War. Countries in this situation are often called satellite states. Similarly, the post-Soviet states and countries formerly allied with the Soviet Union continue to improve relations. The term New Russian Empire is sometimes used since Vladimir Putin took office in 2000 and to describe his aggressive foreign policy in the 2008 Russo-Georgian War, in the illegal annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation in 2014 and in the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian War. Characteristics. Although the Soviet Union was not ruled by an emperor and declared itself anti-imperialist and a people's democracy, it is argued that it exhibited tendencies common to historic empires. The onset of this studies is traditionally attributed to Richard Pipes's book The Formation of the Soviet Union. Several scholars hold that the Soviet Union was a hybrid entity containing elements common to both multinational empires and nation-states. It has also been argued that the Soviet Union practiced colonialism as did other imperial powers. The Soviets pursued internal colonialism in Central Asia, one example being that the state's privileging of grain production over livestock production in Kyrgyzstan favored Slavic settlers over Kyrgyz natives, perpetuating the inequalities of the Tsarist colonial era. Maoists argued that the Soviet Union had itself become an imperialist power while maintaining a socialist facade, or social imperialism. Another dimension of Soviet imperialism is cultural imperialism. The policy of Soviet cultural imperialism implied the Sovietization of culture and education at the expense of local traditions. Leonid Brezhnev continued a policy of cultural Russification as part of developed socialism which sought to assert more central control. Sewer and Bialer argued that the Soviet state had an imperial nationalism. Joseph Stalin ordered population transfers in the Soviet Union, the deportation of people, often entire nationalities, from the 1930s through 1950s with destinations being underpopulated remote areas. The policy officially ended in the Khrushchev era, with many of the nationalities allowed to return in 1957. However, Nikita Khrushchev and Leonid Brezhnev refused the right of return for Crimean Tatars, Russian Germans, and Meskhetian Turks. In 1991, the Supreme Soviet of Russia declared the Stalinist mass deportations to be policy of defamation and genocide. The history of relationship between Russia and these Eastern European countries helps to understand the reactions of the Eastern European countries to the remnants of Soviet culture, namely hatred and longing for eradication. Poland and the Baltic states epitomize the Soviet attempt at the uniformization of their cultures and political systems. According to Dagnarian, Russia was seeking to constitute and reinforce a buffer zone between itself and Western Europe so as to protect itself from potential future attacks from hostile Western European countries. It is important to remember that the 15 socialistic republics in the USSR lost between 26 and 27 million lives over the course of the Second World War. To this end, the Soviet Union believed they needed to expand their influences so as to establish a hierarchy of dependence between targeted states and itself. Such a purpose was thought to be achieved by the means of establishing economic cronyism. The penetration of the Soviet influence into the socialist-leaning countries was also of the political and ideological kind, as rather than getting hold on their economic riches, the Soviet Union pumped enormous amounts of international assistance into them in order to secure influence, eventually to the detriment of its own economy. The political influence they sought to pursue aimed at rallying the targeted countries to their cause in the case of another attack from Western countries and later as a support in the context of the Cold War. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Russia declared itself successor and recognized $103 billion of Soviet foreign debt while claiming $140 billion of Soviet assets abroad. This does not mean that economic expansion did not play a significant role in the Soviet motivation to spread influence in these satellite territories. In fact, these new territories would ensure an increase in the global wealth which the Soviet Union would have a grasp on. If we follow the theoretical communist ideology, this expansion would hypothetically contribute to a higher portion for every Soviet citizen through the process of redistribution of wealth. Soviet officials from the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic intertwined this economic opportunity with a potential for migration. In fact, they saw in these Eastern European countries the potential of a great workforce. They offered a welcome to them upon the only condition that they work hard and achieve social success. This ideology was shaped on the model of the meritocratic, 19th-century American foreign policy.